Hello everyone and welcome back yet again into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Happy Thursday to you all. We have a lot to cover today. Hope you guys will enjoy tonight's Thursday night football game that we covered in yesterday's episode between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons. But today we're going to be transitioning to the weekend's events in both the NFL and college football as well. We're going to continue with a vein of prop bets and betting in general, looking at some more generalistic Week 5 prop bets. I'm going to conclude my positional rankings for the week with the top defenses and special teams units that I believe will shine in Week 5 for you in fantasy football. Then we're going to do a special segment that I've never done before, picking 4 games from the NFL slate on Sunday and giving you my personal picks based off the spreads. Then we're going to look at the college football landscape a little bit, talk about some of the big games to bet on in Week 6 there, and concluding with an injury update in terms of fantasy implications for some key players who you might need to replace. But before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you yet again to, if you so feel inclined, like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. It is greatly appreciated by all concerned, especially me and my fellow podcasters. It means a lot to us doing these kind of shows. But also, if you want to be an even bigger part of this particular show, continue to make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute to the show and interact with the show. Press that $, leave a comment, and it will immediately pop up on my screen, and I will share it to the general public watching this very podcast. If you have anything that you want to talk about, questions, comments, or concerns based off any segments, or just something on your mind, feel free to leave it in the comments section, and I will promise to address it as soon as I possibly can. Without further ado, let us jump right into today's show, starting off, like I said, with some general Week 5 prop bets. We did a kind of comprehensive look and deep dive into tonight's game between the Bucs and the Falcons, so we shift our attention to Sunday's slate. A lot of interesting players, a lot of interesting bets you can place on them in return. Without further ado, let's jump right into this. The first one that I wanted to present to you is a very intriguing one, and this means a lot to me as someone who's a fantasy football owner of this particular guy. He really had a breakout game. He finally did what he's been doing for the past couple of years with many different teams, whether it's his stop in Detroit, whether it was in Philly, and now it's Chicago. This is a vintage game from him. I think that he's going to continue with this week. So, my first prop bet that I want to present is DeAndre Swift going over 48.5 rush yards, minus 110, and he will easily hit that mark. He's going up against a Panthers team that, yes, is rejuvenated, but on the offensive side of the football. The defense, the less we say about them, the better. They're still one of the worst units in the league. They just lost one of their best defensive players at the position a couple weeks ago in Derrick Brown. And this game could turn into a shootout in that regard. And thus, the team that controls the football better, or purportedly has the better running attack, will win this game, in my opinion. And while, yes, the Panthers have Chuba Hubbard, and he's been looking pretty good in this new look Carolina Panthers offense now run by Andy Dalton. But that game that DeAndre Swift had showed promise because it wasn't the prettiest game from him. But it was a game that showed that the Chicago Bears can have variety to their attack. It's not just throwing Caleb Williams out into the fire, hoping he completes incredible passes week in, week out. There's going to be some balance. There's going to be some stability to this team. That's what I saw at that performance. And a game where, you feel like you should win, and you can win pretty easily if you can put up points quickly so that this Carolina Panthers offense can't catch up to you. It's going to be all about ball possession. And if, the Chicago Bears dominate the possession, then DeAndre Swift will have a big part in that. So look for him to get a lot of touches early, kind of dictate the tempo of the game, and most importantly, try and lead Chicago to another big win. And then they'll be over 500, and maybe all the worries that people initially had about this team early in the season might subside. I'm going to have to see how balanced this attack really is, though. The second one, we kind of went over this prop bet yesterday a little bit in depth, but I want to revisit it because it is a very important one. if you're betting tonight's game, and that's Bijan Robinson because, like I said, he's getting a lot of touches, as Raheem Morris promised before the season start. But he hasn't really been effective. When, Algier comes into the game, for some reason, the offense clicks in the run game a little bit more. Tonight, I'm saying that he's going to hit the over, 62.5 rush yards at minus 113. But it's a tentative yes. And the reason why I think that is because in a divisional game, yes, there are many different ways that this game could get more physical than other games because it means more. But I kind of feel like Raheem Morris's offense wants to progress because of the fact Kirk Cousins feels like, at least in games of this nature, someone who can be the difference. And not for nothing, he has proven in the past 3 weeks, minus that one game early in the season against the Steelers where he looked kind of stiff, that he can still throw the rock effectively. So in this game, I'm looking for Kirk Cousins to potentially have a better game than people might expect out of him. I think he's going to have his high in pass attempts for the season, potentially his high in passing yard for the season as well. So the reason that Bijan Robinson kind of doesn't necessarily strike me as someone you should bet on is because of the unpredictability of this Falcons offense. And so I still think Bijan has a lot of value in terms of a betting perspective and potentially a fantasy perspective as well. We're going to have to see. And this game could be the litmus test because they might want to come out guns blazing with Kirk throwing the football early and often to try and compete with that high-powered Bucs offense. But they also might want to make that promise good to Bijan and give him enough opportunity to get as many touches as possible to get the yardage that we know he can. So this is a tentative one, but I wanted to revisit it a little bit more in depth. Another one that's kind of, out there a little bit in terms of a more long shot bet. How about Josh Allen going under 240.5 yards going up against Houston at minus 110? Now, like I said earlier in the week when I made my predictions, my bold fantasy predictions, when I said both Stroud and Allen would struggle in this game, I kind of meant it. Because if you look at both of their performances from last week, the Bills got exploited. The Ravens gave different teams, especially those in the AFC, the blueprint to break down the Bills. If you keep all Josh Allen's receivers in front of him, if you limit what they can do in the run game, if you load the box in the run game and play sticky coverage on the back end, then the Bills can be beat. And I think the Houston Texans defense is one of the more well-equipped ones to handle that because of the depth they have up front and the development of their back-end pieces as well. On the flip side of things, if you look at Josh Allen, he last game wasn't necessarily his best game, but he certainly looked flustered in terms of every single option that he had being taken away from him. I don't necessarily think that will be the case against Houston. There will be opportunities for him to hit the occasional big play, but just note that, these receivers still aren't the most skilled receivers in the league. They're not necessarily guys who are superstars. They're role players who can, in effect, be effective in a kind of committee approach offense, like Joe Brady's trying to build. So, in that case, I was going to say Josh Allen doesn't necessarily impress. He's still going to have an effective game, keep the Bills on schedule. Like I said, don't expect him to pass for gaudy numbers anytime soon, especially against a Houston Texans defense that is stingy, even though they haven't been necessarily fantastic in the takeaways department. But yes, I think that this bet will eventually hit for you, and it's one that I'm willing to stand behind telling you guys this. Another one that's kind of under the radar, but can be a nice little development for you on the betting end of things. How about Deontay Johnson? How about that connection with him and Andy Dalton, that was not on my 2024 NFL season bingo card in the slightest. Deontay Johnson being rejuvenated as a receiver who had glimpses of having a fantastic career over there in Pittsburgh, moving to Carolina, stagnating under Bryce Young, and then eventually, now with Andy Dalton, really becoming the wide receiver one a lot of people expected him to be. So in this game against the Bears secondary that I really love, don't get me wrong, he's really going to test them. I think that the verticality of this offense is back with him and Leggett. And, not for nothing, the Adam Thielen injury, not necessarily a blessing in disguise, because I never want to say that about an injury, but it really has kind of opened up both of these two receivers to bigger plays. And Andy Dalton has the arm talent and the experience to really elevate their play. We've seen it in the past 2 weeks. So Deontay Johnson, look for him to be an underrated receiver, not just in real life, not just in fantasy, but as someone to place some more bets on for as long as the Andy Dalton ride is here in Carolina. And I think that, like I said, this Bears game has a chance to be a classic shootout where neither side, is going to gain the upper hand right away, but they're going to pick at each other and try and find each other's weaknesses. So look for Deontay Johnson to exploit them. And the last one, this one is kind of like a geographical one, so to speak, if there's any such thing as a geographical-based bet. Justin Jefferson going under 82.5 yards in London against the Jets Sunday morning. Our time, their time obviously in the afternoon at -110. And the reason why is I love this Minnesota Vikings team. I think that they're one of the 3 best teams in the league at the current moment. This is a weird kind of trap game right now if you're Minnesota. If you're Minnesota, you have 2 of the biggest wins in the league going up against the 49ers at home and also being the Texans at home, and you already have a divisional win as well. But now you fly to London against a Jets team that's really kind of frustrated. An embarrassing loss against Denver last week. Different time zone, different acclimation period. Therefore, we don't know what to expect, I don't think, out of what Minnesota is going to look like abroad compared to what they've looked like thus far. Whereas the Jets, I feel like, there are a lot more worries about them right now than Minnesota. But their defense has been rounding into form. They're not playing in rainy conditions anymore, hopefully. And I feel like this is the week we're going to start to see more pieces of this Jets offense develop. And there have been trade rumors about a certain receiver over there in Las Vegas potentially coming over there trade deadline time. So that could lead to some excitement around not just the Jets fan base, but the Jets team as a whole. Because right now it definitely feels disjointed. But things could be moving on that front in a hurry. So look for Justin Jefferson to maybe have a worse game than you might expect out of him. More pedestrian numbers than you expect out of him abroad, rather than what we've seen from him to start the season. Let me know what you think in the comments, because all of these prop bets could hit, but they're just my opinion. I want to know yours as well. But coming up on the other side of this short break, we conclude our positional rankings with my personal top 5 defenses and special teams units to look out for on the fantasy football front. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. 'Cause everybody